no compromise, no shortcuts, no excuses. My name is John Hellemans. I am from the Netherlands, where I grew up, and at the age of 25, me and my then girlfriend emigrated to New Zealand, and we made a life here. I became first a GP and then a sports medicine practitioner, and also coach of endurance sport, in particular triathlon. So here we are.
I have to say, you're an overachiever, aren't you? Or at least a high achiever. That's the whole point of what you do.
Well, I've been very fortunate looking back that I've been at the forefront of two new disciplines. And one is the sport of triathlon, which came to New Zealand in 1978, about the same time that I arrived. The swim, bike, run came over from America. And I became immediately interested, having a background in swimming. At the time I was running with the Marlborough Harriers. Every Dutchman can ride a bike, so I could already do the three disciplines. So I became hooked to that particular sport. And secondary, sports medicine in the early 80s was a very new discipline within the medical field. And during my medical training and when I was a GP in the early years, I was always interested, in how medicine related to sport and vice versa. So as a general practitioner, I got a following of athletes who I helped, but I became far too busy. So I decided in an early stage to specialize more in the sports medicine field. And that was at the stage that when I announced this to the dean at the medical school, that he replied, sports medicine is a lot of hot air. And he pointed at me, that was the end of the conversation. So that made me even more determined, rather than that it put me off. And so I was a pioneer in two different disciplines, without seeking that. So looking back, I was very fortunate that I could explore those new disciplines and help build those new disciplines to what they are now.
You've covered some of this in your book. Tell us the title again.
Never ever give up. But the key of the title is the question mark. There is never ever give up, question mark.
Which suggests there is a moment when you recognize that you do have to give up.
Well, I've come to the conclusion that it is great to set goals and pursue goals, but in the process, you find, in particular if you're quite ambitious, that there is a cost. And not necessarily a cost to yourself, but perhaps a cost to others around you, to friends, to family. So I've become aware of that over time. So there's always that balance which you need to look for. So there's a bit of a contradiction. If you want to achieve stuff, you need to pay your attention to it. And when you want to achieve at reasonably high level, the attention needs to be reasonably intense and not wavering. So that then goes at a cost of other things you probably should also pay your attention to. So many people live their lives sharing their attention towards family, work, friends, going out, while the more ambitious tend to have one focus on one thing. Be it in sport, being it in professional areas, being it the performing arts as well. So that's where the question mark comes in.
It's good to have a question mark in life.
I think so, yes. I think it's quite reassuring that we have question marks.
So here's a question mark. What encouraged you to leave the Netherlands and move all the way to New Zealand?
Well, there's two explanations to that. The first one is the one I held on to for a long time, is that I was in my early 20s. I was still an idealist, probably still are today, but very much so. Europe was threatened by the Cold War. The Russians were coming. There were too many people in Holland. So I thought perhaps I should look elsewhere to go and live. There's a second explanation, and that is the explanation my psychotherapist's sister came up with. And she said to me one day when I visited the Netherlands, she said, "John, you fled. You fled the Netherlands." And she was right. I fled probably my dominant father in particular. I had a difficult time with him. And so I fled from that. I also fled from the threat of the Cold War, the nuclear war, the Russians which were coming. I felt almost, I didn't feel free when I grew up. And then I came to New Zealand first in 1976 as a medical student in my 5th year to travel and gain some experience in hospitals here. I worked in Auckland Hospital. I went over to Australia and had an assignment with the Flying Doctor Service. And so that was a fantastic experience. And it gave me a taste of perhaps that there are other ways of living your life and of doing stuff. So I went back and I said to my then girlfriend, "Do you want to come to New Zealand with me?" And she said, "Why not?" And so we both finished our training. She's a dietitian. And in 1978, we immigrated to New Zealand. We always said we go and explore immigration. It wasn't set. We were young. We said if it doesn't work out, we go back. So we were pretty relaxed about that side of things. But obviously, when we came here and settled here, it wasn't really that easy for the first couple of years. But we were very lucky that we were embraced by good Kiwi friends. We met some Kiwis and they took us in and showed us the Kiwi way, helped us raise our daughters as good Kiwi kids. And that probably saved us because they sort of became our family and it reassured us that we'd done the right thing. Obviously, you know, New Zealand is an ideal country with lots of space and clean air and beautiful scenery, but at the end, you know, the people is what it is all about. And so we connected up with the Kiwis at a reasonably early stage, and that sort of settled us well and truly in New Zealand.
That is important, isn't it? To understand a culture. And it is different. What would you say the key differences were between who you were when you arrived and what you met in terms of those cultural differences?
It's in particular between the Dutch and the Kiwis, it's probably subtle, but some of the subtleties matter. For example, the Dutch are known to speak their mind, and I got into trouble with that in the early years, and people would look at me when I said something, "How can you say that?" But our friends laughed about it, accepted it, and almost encouraged it, and said, "Good on you," you know, to be honest. The Kiwis are polite and a bit more reserved, probably a bit afraid of confronting difficult issues. So, and I still grapple with that. You know, you never lose your Dutchness. You know, we emigrated in our 20s, so we are still have that, our Dutch genes well and truly steering us, probably every day. But we've learned a lot from the Kiwi way as well. For example, the togetherness. One is they accept you who you are, but secondly, they also give you that notion that we're all one, that so we're all in this together in this life. And so I don't know what it is, but that's over the years become very clear and has us now considering becoming New Zealand citizens, because one of the things which we're struggling with is that if we become citizens in New Zealand, we have to give up our Dutch citizenship. And for some reason, that's not been an easy decision. Now, we're New Zealand residents, and you have really all the rights as the other Kiwis have, but you're not a citizen. And we're now sort of at this stage, after 40 plus years, that we feel really that we're more Kiwi than we are Dutch. And perhaps the time has come that we become citizens.
Tell me about family then, because you leave a family and you leave the support.
Yes, leaving the family, the Dutch family, wasn't a big a deal. We were in our mid-20s. I was a bit of a rebel. I was happy to escape the family and the pressures which came with it, and the expectations which came with it. I was the second oldest. I had 4 sisters. My father had quite high expectations of his only son. And him and I clashed a lot. So I was probably happy to get away from that. But since I've lived in New Zealand and I've traveled back several times to Holland, I've become a lot closer to my family. Taking distance from my Dutch family has brought me closer to them. Initially also to my parents, where my contact with, in particular with my father, became less threatening. I always got on very well with my mother. I greatly still admire her. And my 4 sisters, I now am closer to than I've ever been when I lived in Holland. It's been an interesting journey.
So you came to New Zealand with your then girlfriend and you got married. Tell me about the family here.
We did. It's actually a funny story getting married here, because we were in Blenheim. This was in the late 70s. We arrived and I had announced that I had been offered a job by the Wairau Hospital via telegram because I needed a job before I could emigrate. So I'd been writing to the different hospital boards, and some of them wrote me a whole pile of forms to fill in. Others didn't reply at all, but the Wairau Hospital sent me a telegram, job offered by the 1st of December as a house surgeon. Please reply by return telegram. So I did. Anyway, we arrived, and I wrote in a letter later, I said, well, I will be traveling with my fiancée. I thought that sounded pretty official. Well, she was my girlfriend. And unbeknown to us, they had a special board meeting what to do with his fiancée. Would they allow us to live together, which at the time in Holland would be quite normal to live in sin like that. But in rural Blenheim, it was not a done thing. So perhaps they should put the fiancée up in a nurse's home and me in the house surgeon quarters. But I think that motion was defeated by a very narrow margin, and we were allowed to live together. So sure enough, 6 months later, my then fiancée became pregnant. So what to do?
In rural Blenheim?
In rural Blenheim, living in sin, not being married. And so we decided, as part of our process of integrating in this country, to get married. But we got married our own way, perhaps a little bit of a Dutch way. We got married on the beach. We'd only been in New Zealand for just over a year. So we got married on Whites Bay Beach in the Marlborough Sound. And then we moved to Christchurch, where I did the general practice training and where we settled and where we had 2 beautiful girls. And now we have 4 grandkids.
From someone who has moved here from a different place, have you been welcomed? Does it feel as though it's home?
Totally, yes. It's something which I ask myself, will I always be an immigrant? Will I always be a Dutchman in New Zealand? I like to think that I'm now a Kiwi. I think the only thing which defines me as a Dutchman still is probably my accent. And I know I'm probably still being judged by some, but if that's the case, it's always been done in a mild form. So that's a human thing, and I do the same when I meet people from other countries. So no, it's been very gentle. It's been a very gentle journey.
The diversity, the mix of this country will have changed over the time you were here as well. Are we a diverse country?
I think we're a very diverse country, and I think it's wonderful. There's also risks attached to it. And I think that as immigrants, I feel strongly we need to embrace the New Zealand culture. And I'm particularly proud of the Maori culture, which I think is probably the New Zealand culture, rather than our British, empire background, because we're not that. We're New Zealand. We're Aotearoa, and I love the point of difference, which is set by the Maori way and the Maori customs and the Maori culture. I think they've got some beautiful things in their culture. And
do you in any way integrate that in a holistic sense with your medical viewpoint? How you approach patients? Is that something that intimate?
I'm not sure. We do get taught about Maori custom within our medical training. I think I'm very much myself when I see people, and I try and place myself in the patient's shoes and approach them as such.
If we look at high performance sport, your expertise in that, is there something that comes from New Zealand, perhaps something comes from your background in the Netherlands, that together help make something unique?
So in the Netherlands, sport is very structured. They have a wonderful system of club sports, which is very well supported, and athletes develop up through the ranks, all very well organized. And the Dutch are very analytical. They analyze everything, so technically, but also social aspects of sports. So they have lots of meetings, and I remember when I was there, they had meetings all the time, and I got sick of meetings, and I said to them, we shouldn't meet so much, we should be out there training. But later on, I realized that actually they did achieve something with those meetings. In New Zealand, we are basically very passionate about sport. It's part of our culture. And Kiwis are very tough as well. So they apply themselves well, no compromise, no shortcuts, no excuses. That's what I learned from New Zealand high performance sport. And if we can combine the two, you're on to a winner.
Great career, which continues. But what are you most proud of to date?
I'm the most proud of having been a kind dad. And I think that's what I genuinely feel I'm most proud of. I hope my daughters agree that I've been a kind dad. I think they probably do. you.